we're not yet at a future where the corporate media is entirely irrelevant. We're in this liminal state,
right.
this intermediate state where the new media is relevant, it's useful, it's necessary, certainly for newcomer break on the scene like me, but it coexists in a landscape where the traditional gatekeepers are still very much present, relevant, and important. And so they realized here's the game they're going to play is, take this conversation you and I are having, right? This is going to be a 90-minute conversation. The thing about a conversation is it has context. What we say 40 minutes from now may call back something that you and I just spoke about 10 minutes ago, all right? That's the nature of this format. The corporate media operates, television, let's just take cable television as an example, based on 2, 3, 4-minute segments. And so there started to be a really interesting thing that started to happen in July and August is by then there's a whole body of probably tens, hundreds of podcasts like this that I had done, where what they were able to do was to then helicopter, airlift something that came out of a conversation that had context attached to it, right? An hour, sometimes 2 hours worth of context around a statement. But to airlift that and to put that on air in a way that was cast in a completely different context than what it was intended in the context of a 2-hour conversation. And it wasn't that they were just punishing me. What they were doing in the process was creating a disincentive for anybody else to actually participate in those longer form conversations. Because the message is, if you do that, do it at your own peril because you will be punished. Unless you do it the standard way where you script it, you don't go through exactly what the traditional assembly line is for political communication, and you're going to do it through the format that we have control over, or else we will punish the defector. And that's what they began to do. So in August, in the lead up to the first debate, and this was somewhat damaging to me, and it created a bit of a theme that the other candidates pounced on and exploited as a theme. Well, I'll tell you, the surprising thing that happened at the first debate was, remember, my whole thing was in March, make the debate stage. What happened is in the summer, I surged so much so that not only did I make the debate stage, I was at the center of the very first debate stage. Ron DeSantis and I were the two people at the center of that debate stage, one of whom was the guy who was the preordained challenger and replacer of Donald Trump, according to many pundits in the world of conservative media, and then another guy who nobody had heard of. At the center of a debate stage was the former vice president, multiple U.S. senators to governors to other people who were irritated as hell that I was there. And I did not expect this, Dr. Peterson, but the thing that shocked me, I enjoyed it, was at that first debate, I ended up being the target of every person. You were actually, I think, in that room physically even. And that was interesting to me. But in the lead up to that is what really gave them the ammo. And this is where I wasn't strategizing at all. At that point, I was just still continuing my talk to everyone strategy. I'll talk to everybody. I'll talk unfiltered, et cetera. There was a reporter from The Atlantic. This is a funny story. I haven't really gone into depth on this, but I should. There's a reporter from The Atlantic who has been really asking, The Atlantic has been asking to do a detailed embedded profile of us. My team, and I think maybe they were a little bit shrewder than me on this, said, well, we want to be careful about this. I said, what the hell? Let him in. We're talk to everybody strategy. We've committed to something, stick to it, practice what we preach. So he came to Columbus, Ohio, and then he was going to come on a private flight to whatever campaign stops we were making, culminating the lead up to the first debate. And there was something funny about this guy. I forget his name, okay? But the first thing he says, it's weird. It's like bizarre. He has a very mild-mannered affect. And he goes out of his way to say multiple times, I have a stutter. I was like, okay, I don't care if you have a stutter. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. But he went out of his way for me to understand that he had a stutter. And he told my wife and everybody else he met, apologizing profusely, I have a stutter, so don't mind me on this. My wife has a wisdom that I don't, but she said, just be careful about this guy because of that fact, right? It's not that he had a stutter. It's that he went out of his way to point that fact out to us. That she says, I think he's looking to potentially exploit you. Just be careful with him. I didn't take it one way or another. She, it ended up being a Kaiser Sose kind of character, is what for those of you who know the movie reference there. Anyway, he follow me around, builds a lot of sympathetic rapport with me, and ends up really somewhat of an intellectual, smart guy, ended up able to be leveling with the arguments that I was making, demonstrating his sympathy for the essence, not just the superficiality, but the essence of the arguments. So I feel like I'm really leveling with somebody. By this point in the campaign, we had learned a lesson. So what my press secretary, she smartly had the habit of anytime a recorder is recording the conversation, she also goes on the record and records the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
On the record, let's make it mutually on the record. Now, she has worked 24/7 for a lot of the campaign. One of the weekends she had to go to a wedding. Okay. And this was during the flight that this gentleman and I were taking to a campaign stop where we were headed. So now he has me without my sort of press person near me. And I think without being in recording, he's got his recorder on the plane. Okay. So we're talking, and I'm foolishly just, talking away like I'm talking to a friend here, to a guy who's already ingratiated himself a little bit, softened his image with me. I almost felt even a little bit saddened for the guy that he had this loss of self-confidence based on some attribute that wasn't his own and seemed like a smart guy. And so we're talking, and he pulls out. So about 2 weeks before something had happened where I was on one of these podcasts, and a guy by the name of Alex Stein asks me, he's hosting kind of a quasi-comedic podcast. And he asked me, do you believe what the government's told you about 9/11? And I said, do I believe everything the government's told me about 9/11? Well, the reality is we know the government's lied to us based on declassified documents that came out 20 years after 9/11 that Omar al-Bayoumi, who was a individual who was previously deemed to be a 42-year-old graduate student that randomly met two of the hijackers. That was the story that the 9/11 Commission and the FBI published 20 years ago. Turned out in the declassified documents 20 years later was a Saudi intelligence operative. So we know the government lied about that. So based on that hard fact, of course, we don't believe everything the government has told us about this. Now, that statement was the fodder. It's the classic move. Take something in the context of a podcast-style conversation, airlift that to the conversation about, okay, so here's the conversation we had on the airplane. He says, all right, I believe the government should tell the truth about what we know about what happened on January 6th. And that's something I have been very vocal about during the campaign. I think government should tell us everything. Everything's fair game. Were there FBI agents in the field? Tell us, were there FBI agents in the field? Were there FBI informants in the field? Just answer the question transparently. Most of the mainstream media throughout the campaign has said that the FBI director has said there were none. Actually, that's false. Christopher Wray, when he's responding to Congress, refused to answer the question, which the media has then later reported as saying that he said there were none. So I said, whatever it is, just tell us the truth. And so we have a detailed, must be a 20-minute conversation easily about my view on the government's obligation to just be transparent, whatever it is. Just let the public tell the truth. Publish all the video footage. Don't disclose some video footage and hide others. Just tell the public the truth. We, the people, deserve the truth. So then he asked me, okay, well, were there federal agents in the field on January 6th? Do you think it's a fair question to say, were there federal agents on the plane on 9/11? Now, this is a loony idea, right? There's not a shred of evidence for this. But in the context of my principled answer, saying that for January 6th or for anything else, the government should just tell the people the truth. I said, look, the government should tell the people the truth, whatever it is. I have no reason to believe that there were federal agents on the plane. It's a ridiculous idea to think there were, but whatever it is, the government should tell the truth to the people. Okay, on that segment. And it was one snippet of maybe a 30-minute conversation on this topic, which is a broader 2-hour conversation during a flight. The story comes out. This is right on the eve of the debate. Okay, and the story comes out from The Atlantic. It's in a detailed story, goes into a lot of other things. The one thing that the editor-in-chief, or whoever the main editor guy is at The Atlantic, puts out and highlights is Ramaswamy fuels conspiracy theories, asking whether there are federal agents on the planes on 9/11. So this is weeks later after he's come. So I truthfully, I remember the January 6th conversation. This was a one-off snippet. I didn't remember saying that. And I just told my team, I was like, I don't remember saying that. I mean, clearly these people have reporting standards. He was recording a conversation. He's reporting on something. Can you just ask The Atlantic, just share with us the recording where I said it, just for my own knowledge of what I even said. It was a free-flowing conversation. I'm not denying the way I was quoted, but just tell me what I said. They refused to. Now, CNN, this comes full circle from the Don Lemon, has their own vengeance to square, has booked me that night, okay? And boy, are they coming ready. And I'm sure there's coordination. It was done in a level at which it would be hard to believe there's not some level of coordination here. So CNN's booked me that night. And they asked me the question. So I know I'm going to get asked about this. So I'd like to know. So we just respectfully asked The Atlantic, what did I actually say? Just tell me, what do you have? What's the thing that you're quoting here in the article? Because then the article goes on. There's a bunch. I'm being panned across the spectrum, left and right at this point, and they refuse to provide it. So I go on CNN, and she says, why are you saying that there could have been federal officers on the plane on 9/11? So I've never thought such a thing. It sounds to me like a ridiculous proposition. So I say, look, I don't think I said that. I think I was misquoted or taken out of context. That's the truth of it. And I think that what I did not realize is that's when they knew they had won, because she went out of her way to say, oh, I take you at your word there. Okay. What they had then, within hours of that interview airing, The Atlantic slices just that portion where he's questioned me after the detailed discussion about January 6th. Would it be fair for the government to ask the question of were there agents on the plane on 9/11? Just release that snippet. And then CNN and the entire media has a field day. Because the entire slogan of my campaign is speak the truth, right? Speak the truth when it's easy, when it's hard. Truth is the one-word slogan of my campaign. They use this to damage the hell out of me. And so I asked The Atlantic, we said publicly, you release the snippet, why don't you release the entire conversation? Why would you? To this day, they haven't done it. And to this day, I will challenge them. If you want to be honest arbiters of it, CNN the whole next day running an entire field day saying that he said, and if you listen to the exact footage, it's even different than they describe it. The exact footage is, sure, I think the government should tell the truth. I have no reason to believe there were. It seems like a ridiculous idea that there should be, but whatever it is, the government should tell the truth. That's what I said, which they summarize as saying that I'm raising conspiracy theories that there were federal agents on the plane on 9/11.
Right.
Ridiculous.
Now you attribute that to, so let's go into the attribution. So obviously this was somewhat shocking for you.
Shocking.
Yeah. Okay. So now, but you've already set up some diagnosis of the motivation. You said that as far as you were concerned, the legacy media wasn't very happy with you sidestepping them, let's say, even though at that point you didn't really have an alternative. They also weren't very happy with the fact that their attempts to pigeonhole you, let's say, had backfired quite spectacularly. And then you had this character from The Atlantic who played I'm your friend while you invited him in, only to try to find one of these situations where something you said could be taken out of context to savage your reputation. But
yes.
But there's the rub, eh? Like, why exactly? Is it just the additive combination of the reporter wants to make a name for himself, The Atlantic wants to have a story, CNN wants to capitalize on it, along with the fact that, well, it would be lovely to throw some dirt on a Republican because what the hell, why not? And to paint him with this right-wing conspiracy theory. Like, is that sufficient? Is that the causal explanation for the manner in which that laid itself out? And then we'll get back to what effect that had at the debate.
Yeah. So I don't think it was sufficient. All those things were definitely factors. But I think this was in the context of something is going as it's not supposed to here. Okay? There's a guy here who is advancing a Trumpian worldview of positive, I think of it as a positive nationalism, but nationalism nonetheless in the United States. And he is defying our expectations for what that's supposed to look like, because he speaks in a manner that is at least as, I'm not saying this about myself, I'm saying this what I think they see in me, as erudite and educated from the halls of the same Ivy League colleges that they deem to be their esteemed institutions, and speaking in a manner that goes toe-to-toe on the facts with debating so-called the science on issues relating to COVID policy or otherwise that we're unable to contend with. This is a real threat. We need to go after this in a deeper way, because he's not given us the video clips from speeches that we can caricature. We need to actually set the traps. And this needs to be quashed. It needs to be quashed now. And by the way, this social media thing that's sidestepping us, to hell with that. That's creating the disinformation. That's creating the alternative, the misinformation that allows candidates like this to rise. It is our job and our social responsibility as a media institution to extinguish that possibility. Let's punish his ability to do that by lifting some of the comments he's made in those lewd settings offline from the traditional media that individual citizens are beginning to access to their own peril and set the record straight for how this is done, we're the people who vet, who actually become serious presidential candidates. When he's a non-serious contender, who cares? But this guy's rising in the polls to become a serious presidential candidate, could really have an impact in shaping public opinion. We have an ability and a responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. Cut his legs off, I think, was exactly what happened. And then you have the industrialized politics in a Republican primary where that provides the fodder for other candidates who are frustrated by the same thing happening to be able to use that to their advantage. Not even the candidates, but in many cases, even the super PACs supporting them, which is part of this industrialized cesspool of the modern industry of American politics. That's really what happened.